Here's the thing about Lehman Brothers. They survived the Civil War. They survived the Great Depression. They made it through two world wars, a Russian debt default, and at least four separate moments where America thought the whole thing was finished. They'd been around since 1844. That's 164 years of watching the world fall apart and somehow still opening for business on Monday. And then, in the space of a single weekend in September 2008, they were gone. Not restructured, not quietly acquired. Gone. The fourth largest investment bank in America, carrying $639 billion in assets and 25,000 employees, filed for the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history. So, how do you take a company that old, that powerful, that deeply woven into the financial system and drive it face first into the pavement? You get creative with mortgages, and you never once stop to ask if any of it actually makes sense. Let's go back, way back. 1844, a German immigrant named Henry Lehman opened a dry goods store in Montgomery, Alabama. He sold fabric, tools, groceries, basic stuff. His brothers Emmanuel and Mayer came over and joined him. Three guys, one small shop in the South, absolutely no idea what they were starting. Cotton was everywhere in Alabama back then. Farmers would sometimes pay their bills in raw cotton instead of cash. The Lemons figured out they could trade it, not just sell goods, trade the actual commodity. And just like that, the dry goods store became something else entirely, a brokerage, a money machine. They moved to New York, helped found the New York Cotton Exchange, got into railroads, insurance, finance. One scrappy store in Alabama quietly became one of the most powerful banks on the planet. 160 years of hustle and survival and relentless reinvention. By the time the 20th century rolled in, Lehman wasn't just a bank, it was a Wall Street institution. They financed department stores, airlines, film studios. They took companies public and put capital behind ideas that became household names. For most of their history, Lehman ran lean, conservative. The old guard knew exactly what had built this place, and they protected it. But then the 1980s arrived. Wall Street changed. The money got faster and louder. Leverage became the new religion. Bigger bets, bigger returns, and if you were wrong, well, figure that out later. American Express bought Lehman in 1984, and by the time the 2000s rolled around, Lehman was leaner, hungrier, and determined to prove themselves all over again. That's when thin GS started getting genuinely dangerous. The early 2000s were basically a housing fever dream. Interest rates were low, banks were handing out mortgages to anyone who showed up with a pulse and a pen. People who couldn't afford a studio apartment were getting approved for five-bedroom homes. Someone had to bundle all those mortgages together and sell them as investments. That's where Lehman came in. Mortgage-backed securities. The idea sounded simple enough. You take a bunch of home loans, wrap them together, and sell slices of that bundle to investors. Homeowners make their payments. Investors earn returns. Everybody wins. Brilliant. Except the homes were overvalued. The borrowers couldn't actually afford them, and the people rating these bundles as safe were absolutely not reading the fine print. But hey, the numbers look good. The bonuses were bigger. Nobody wanted to be the guy who pumped the brakes at the party. Lehman didn't just participate in this. They accelerated between 2003 and 2006. They went on a buying spree and acquired 5 separate mortgage lenders. 5. They weren't just selling the bundles anymore. They were originating the loans themselves, building the whole pipeline from scratch. By the end of 2007, Lehman held $111 billion in real estate-related assets, more than double what they held the year before. The housing market was already wobbling. Warning signs were everywhere. Defaults were ticking up. Foreclosures were climbing. But Lehman doubled their exposure anyway. Because when the music is playing, you keep dancing, even when the floor is cracking underneath you. Here's where you start to wonder who exactly was minding the store. Dick Fuld had run Lehman since 1994. Intense, competitive, obsessive. Wall Street called him the gorilla. He pushed hard, won big, and had turned Lehman into one of the most aggressive shops in the market. His confidence in the firm was absolute. When analysts raised concerns about Lehman's real estate exposure in 2007, Fuld brushed them off. When short sellers started betting against the stock, he called them predators. When a board member reportedly floated the idea of exploring a sale as a precaution, Fuld shut it down. We don't need saving. We're Lehman Brothers. That attitude, that refusal to acknowledge the cliff that was already visible, would cost 25,000 people their jobs and shake the entire global economy down to its foundation. By early 2008, the cracks were turning into craters. Bear Stearns collapsed in March. The government organized a rescue. JP Morgan bought them out for basically nothing. Everyone on Wall Street was watching. Everyone knew Lehman was sitting on similar positions. And still, Fuld insisted the firm was fine. The assets were solid. The market would recover. Analysts looked at Lehman's books and started doing math that didn't add up. The firm was leveraged roughly 30 to 1. For every dollar of real equity, they had borrowed 30. That means a 3% drop in asset values wipes you out entirely. Not hurts you, wipes you out completely. And real estate had not dropped 3%. It had fallen off a cliff and kept going. The summer of 2008 was one long slow-motion disaster. Lehman's stock fell, then fell more, then fell again. The firm tried to raise capital. They talked to the Korean Development Bank. Nothing came through. They tried to find a buyer. Bank of America was interested for about 5 minutes, then turned around and bought Merrill Lynch instead. Barclays wanted Lehman, but British regulators blocked the deal at the last minute. So Lehman sat there bleeding out while every rescue rope got cut. The Treasury was watching. The Federal Reserve was watching. And the message from Washington was basically, we are not bailing out another investment bank. That line had already been crossed with Bear Stearns. They weren't crossing it again.
So Lehman was on its own.
September 14, 2008, a Sunday, executives from banks across Wall Street gathered at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The message was simple: figure out how to save Lehman or watch what happens Monday morning. They didn't figure it out. The deals fell apart. The buyers walked. The government held the line. And just after midnight, Lehman Brothers, 164 years old, carrying $639 billion in assets and the full weight of American financial history behind it, filed for bankruptcy, the largest in U.S. history, Chapter 11, game over, Monday morning. September 15, 2008, the markets opened. The Dow dropped more than 500 points that day, its worst single-day plunge since the September 11th attacks. 5% of the S&P 500 vanished before lunch. Traders stared at screens like the numbers were written in a language they'd never seen before. Employees showed up at Lehman's headquarters with cardboard boxes. They walked out past the cameras in silence, carrying their things, their faces blank. 25,000 jobs, gone overnight. And that was just the start of the damage. The Lehman collapse didn't stay in New York. It went everywhere instantly. Lehman held 906,000 active derivative contracts worldwide. Notional value? $35 trillion. That's not a typo. 35 trillion in financial contracts, all of which suddenly had a question mark where a counterparty used to be. Banks stopped trusting each other. Credit markets froze. The whole system that depends on overnight lending between institutions seized up like an engine with no oil left in it. The day after Lehman filed, the Federal Reserve had to lend $85 billion to AIG just to keep it from going under too. AIG had been insuring all those mortgage-backed securities that nobody properly valued. Pull one thread and the entire sweater unravels. The real economy didn't escape. Roughly $10 trillion in stock market value worldwide was wiped out in the months that followed. Retirement accounts collapsed. People who spent 40 years building savings watched half of it disappear over a few weeks. By early 2009, the Dow hit 6,594, down more than 50% from its peak. I need you to sit with that number. Unemployment climbed to 10%. General Motors filed for bankruptcy. Chrysler filed for bankruptcy. Ireland, Greece, Spain, Portugal fell into sovereign debt crises that tore apart their economies for years. All of it connected, all of it traced back, at least in part, to that Sunday night in September when nobody would write the check that might have stopped it. Here's the part that sticks with you. Lehman wasn't even the worst actor in this story. They weren't running an outright fraud like WorldCom, where executives literally cooked the books and invented $11 billion in earnings out of thin air. Lehman was doing what everyone else was doing. The whole system was built on one assumption: housing prices never fall nationally, that the models were right, that the ratings agencies actually understood what they were rating, that someone somewhere was watching. Every single assumption turned out to be wrong at exactly the same time. And Lehman, because of the sheer scale of their bets and the stubborn refusal to raise a white flag, became the one that didn't get rescued. Dick Fuld testified before Congress in October 2008. He said he felt absolute personal responsibility. He said he asked himself every night whether there was something more he could have done. He said every decision was made in good faith, with the best information available at the time. Outside the hearing room, former employees were updating their resumes. Fuld had taken home roughly $500 million in compensation in the years leading up to the collapse. The workers clearing their desks on September 15th did not have that cushion. What would you say, one congressman asked him, to the American people? Fuld looked at the cameras. He didn't have a great answer. Nobody in that room did. The aftermath took years to sort through. The Dodd-Frank Act of 2010 rewrote the rules for how big banks operated, how much risk they could carry, what would happen if they got too close to the edge again. New stress tests required banks to prove they could survive a crisis before the crisis arrived. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created specifically for the people who had been handed mortgages they couldn't afford by institutions that didn't care. Some of those rules held. Some got quietly softened before the ink dried. But the question that keeps coming back, every time markets start climbing too fast and leverage starts quietly building again, is whether any of it actually changes the math. Because Lehman Brothers survived 164 years of wars, crashes, and catastrophes, and the thing that finally brought it down wasn't any of that. It was a business model that everyone at the top believed in completely, all the way until the moment they didn't have to anymore.